So today I'm going to talk a little bit about using research and the research and articles that you find and applying it directly to your paper. I'm going to go through kind of my thought process with some of the best places to look in some of these articles in order to find the information that you need for your papers. So let's jump into this thing. So I'm going to throw in. So I did my paper on fighting anxiety with meditation and mindfulness practices, and yeah, and so basically in this part of my paper, in this level, I'm looking at meditation and emotional regulation, and I explain a little bit of how when participating in meditation, it helps increase levels of emotional regulation. And I found a really good example, a really good case study about meditation and college students' anxiety regulation. And I found this article. I'm going to share it here. Let me minimize this. And I brought it up here. The effects of transcendental meditation practice on brain functioning and stress reactivity in college students. So this stress reactivity is really closely related to emotional regulation, in the sense of the more emotional regulation you have, the less reactive you'll be to stressful situations. How did I learn that? I learned that from this article here. So when looking at articles, good places to look are, the abstract helps you understand certain things. When we're looking for citing information, the introduction, the results, and the discussion are super, super helpful. And I'll show just a few examples of me doing so, of citing certain things that I learned. So I learned other college experiences, high pressure, interrupted sleep, alcohol, drug use are left their mark. I've talked about there's this stress downshifts to a stimulus response mode, sympathetic reactivity. And I talk about just kind of gives the introduction's cool because it gives you a background and gives you a lot of base information you should know going into the study. Why is that useful for you in your paper? A lot of that base information, you can find good sources there, because they cite a lot of people as well as some of the things that they have knowledge of as well. But yeah, so you can find a lot of good information from the introduction, because it gives a nice intro to what the paper is going to be, a good background. For example, I said academic, social, and work-related pressures associated with their lifestyle. College students are often vulnerable to high levels of stress on a regular basis. Cool. Yeah, so as you can see, a lot of what's been said in this area here is related to that. High pressure, interrupted sleep, experiences. It basically talks about that in this introduction. It talks about college students going through kind of a harder time, and it gives a background on that. So that's a good place where I did that, where I looked at that and got some information there. There's also another article that I mentioned that. But some of the most important stuff, here's some of the results of the study. And so I went to the discussion here. After reading this, it's cool. They basically did some brain tests on students, and as they took midterms and tests, those who had meditated had a less reactivity to the stress they were feeling during their exams. So it's pretty cool. The discussion's cool because it talks about the significant findings, and let's see if I can find exactly where it was. Let's see here. Sorry, I should have looked at this right here. Pause for a second, find my place. Cool, so I found it. So it says here, while the delayed start participants showed the expected increase in sympathetic reactivity, which is basically their body reacting to the stress under high stress, the sympathetic reactivity of the meditating students remained low. Transcendental meditation practice seemed to buffer the effects of high stress of finals week. Cool. So if we look at my paper, I even mentioned that. I said that regulate their physiological reaction to such stressors, which is in the sense of what they did by being able to regulate their stress and their reactivity to those things. Yeah, so it's cool that you can get just information straight from some of these articles. I think that I even mentioned, I even mentioned some of those results right there. I talked about that students who had this idea of how they're able to regulate during finals and stuff. Like, here we go. Here, Travis et al. Found that college students who practiced regular meditation had a significantly lower reactivity to highly stressful events like finals week. And if we go back to, I was looking there, it talks about how they were able to have less stress during finals week, and they have to buffer the effects of high stress of finals week. So that's one example of how I did that there. So you can also use the results section. It's pretty helpful as well. But a lot of times you don't have to understand a lot of statistics in order to get a lot out of these. Basically, you need to know how to understand kind of basic trends with stuff, which I get a lot of that from the discussion. It talks about the findings and things like that and analyzes it a little bit more. And so it might take a little bit longer to look into how to understand some of these things because you probably haven't taken a stats class yet, and that's no problem. You don't need to. Focus a lot on the introduction and the discussion, and using little bits and pieces and nuggets of knowledge that you can with that. And that doesn't always necessarily have to be a quote. You don't always have to quote things directly. Most of my citations are paraphrasing, where I'll mention the thing that they mention, and I'm not necessarily quoting. I think I quote maybe just a few times, because quotes are, you want to make sure that your voice is heard. You don't want to just put a bunch of quotes from them unless they use specific terms. That's probably a good idea. But that's just kind of one example of how I did that, how I applied specifically to my research or to my paper.